Hi, I'm James Vowles. I'm here to answer your questions about the Spanish Grand Prix. The first question is around Valtteri's start and why he lost so many places off the line. It was really two effects. The first was his initial reaction time was just slightly behind that of Stroll, Verstappen and Lewis, so he lost that initial jump off the line. The next element is the further forward you are, the less you have the impact of the toe from cars in front, and Stroll and Verstappen were able to use that to good effect and get alongside Valtteri. The actual start itself, once the reaction time was done, was competitive relative to those three cars, but the damage was unfortunately done right early on in that start procedure. Once Valtteri was back in P3, we were reviewing options, and there were really only two on the table. The first is to go longer, force Verstappen into an early stop, make sure he covers you, and then go much longer than him and do an overcut and overtake on track. The second is obviously the undercut, the one that's most known about. But to do that, you need to be very, very close to the car in front. And on the first stint, we simply weren't there. We were dropping off the tyre curves and we weren't able to get close enough to Verstappen. Understandably so. Valtteri had been fighting through traffic to get up to that point and had lost a little bit more of the shine outside the tyre. On stint 2, there was an opportunity for an undercut, a very small one. It appeared for a lap, and that was it. And it was very marginal to take a medium and then undercut, but it existed. We debated it. It was definitely an option that we went through on the pit wall, but there were also options we felt by going longer, and it was really balancing those two. Perhaps unbeknownst as well, there was a bit of a distraction of a thunderstorm that was taking place nearby, and the concern as to whether that could maybe push across the circuit. All of that combined meant we left that opportunity on the table and went for the longer stint. Wrong decision, I think, in hindsight. I think we had an opportunity to undercut just on that one lap, around lap 39. Either way, Valtteri did a sterling job trying to recover, did a brilliant job getting back into P3, and we look forward to the next event. All of the top 10 were on that soft tyre, and it was a fast tyre relative to the medium, but had quite strong degradation. And around about lap 20 or so, that degradation started to get higher. We were waiting for Verstappen to stop and see what tyres he fitted. We had a comfortable gap with Lewis, and it made sense to see where he would go to and how our stint would pan out. When Verstappen stopped, in Lewis's case, it was very straightforward. We cover him and make sure we don't lose that buffer that he's worked so hard to build up. In the case of Valtteri, his tyres were also dropping, more so than Lewis's, because he had to fight through traffic early on in that stint. What we wanted to do is make sure we didn't lose any race time we didn't need to Verstappen to present opportunities later in the race. That wasn't a stint that we were going to be able to do anything, but if we waited, we would lose several seconds of important race time, which could cost us later in the race. So we decided to box both cars. There was 10 seconds between them, and we have a pit crew that is incredibly good at dealing with these situations, and again, did a great job on the day. A one stop was something that we discussed the morning of the race, and in fact, as we came in to work, the temperatures were quite a bit lower. There was a lot of cloud cover, and perhaps that may just be enough to push us in that direction. However, it was highlighted as an outside opportunity. We knew that some of the midfield cars, some of the cars behind may try it, and indeed it'd be one of their best defences against some other cars behind them. But in our case, based on what we saw on Friday, we felt that the two-stop would be the best overall strategy for both cars. In the case of Valtteri being caught up in the early traffic, it really meant that we couldn't hit the target stop lap we needed to get to, which was around about lap 29, lap 30. And you would have seen Perez going to that lap, some of the other cars behind trying to target that lap. And even then, it's not a nailed-on one stop. It's a very, very long stint to be doing on your second tyre. Around lap 20, our degradation increased, and it was fairly clear from that point that it would be very tricky to do a one stop. Not impossible, but as you can see in this plot, what we've done is illustrate what a two-stop looks like, soft, medium, medium, which is the race that Lewis did, and what the one stop looks like. And towards the end of the race, that one stop's in dire trouble. Now, in fact, these are the curves that we have as an average across teams. But Valtteri was in a worse situation on that first stint, so it would have looked even more poor than this at the end of the race. So to answer the question, do we consider it? Absolutely. We always consider all options going into it, but on this occasion, it wasn't available to us. For Valtteri's final stop, we had a choice between a medium and a soft. The medium would have been in a new state. The soft was a used tyre that we had used in qualifying. When we make those decisions, we review all of the data available to us in the race. We review what happened on the first stint and the second stint for both of our cars. We knew how they performed on each of those compounds, how fast they were, what the life was, and how they'd be able to push them at the end of the race. We don't just do that for ourselves, we do that for all competitors. And on balance, The soft was actually a faster tyre for 19 laps based on everything that we could see. If we compare stint 2, which is when we were on the medium, to the first stint of the race, we're actually just a few tenths offset. Now, some of that's going to be in the management, some of that's going to be depending on the car position, but there wasn't much to tell between the two tyres at that stage, and that was comparing a new medium to a used soft. At the end of the race, when Verstappen took the medium, it made somewhat sense to also offset ourselves and compound to him. The temperatures had come down, the track was cooling, and we felt it could give us our best opportunity. But the reality is, on the model, both the medium and the soft looked like we had an opportunity to overtake and pass him. As Valtteri got back out, we were surprised at the times they weren't quite where they needed to be. And Valtteri was having to do a lot of protection of that tyre to stop it overheating, more than we had anticipated. And ultimately, the pace wasn't strong enough with that tyre in order to get the overtake. Following every Grand Prix, we do an in-depth review of all of our elements, be it strategy, aero, tyres, setup. We ensure that we understand and take away what we can as lessons so we can apply them immediately to the following Grand Prix. Clearly, following Silverstone, there was a lot of focus on the tyre management and the overheating that we experienced during the course of that race, including the blistering. We had but a few days to get on top of this. And clearly, you're not going to change the car dramatically between those two events. Barcelona is slightly different. It's a higher downforce track. We run a bigger wing than we do in Silverstone. But other than that, you're not going to fundamentally change the design of the car. So you work with what you have, which is setup and management. We highlighted that there were a few areas where we weren't quite optimal in Silverstone if we had to go back there. But the problem is, without racing at the same circuit in the same conditions, you can't validate that. And as we went into Barcelona, there were a few tweaks on setup and a few tweaks to how we were going to approach the weekend and use the tyres. I'm happy to say that the incredible work that was done over those really just few days really paid off during the course of the race. We were managing the tyres, as was Verstappen, but when we needed a bit of performance, it was there and available, and Lewis was just able to eke out a tenth at a time at the key points in the race. And really, it paid dividends. Again, for Valtteri, the P3 car, the car that was following the other two in the dirty air for most of the race, and that's what makes overheating even worse, was able to really bring it home, scythe through traffic, and even get just about within undercut range of Verstappen. That's an incredible change of where we were just 7 days before. Now, the reality is, are the problems fixed? It's unlikely. The situation that happened at Silverstone is different to what we had in Barcelona. We have to keep learning, we have to keep improving. But what I'm happy to report is the conditions we had in Barcelona were some of the most difficult this year. It was as warm. It was as sweltering on track. And the reality behind that is we performed well in those conditions, and we need to keep improving and moving forward. We've spoken a lot about the tyres over the last few weeks, but it's incredibly warm, and when it's this warm, we have ambient temperatures around 33 degrees, track temperatures around 55. The drivers suffer as well in these conditions. It's mentally exhausting, but also physically exhausting. And to put some numbers to that, they lost over 2 kilos of fluid during the Barcelona Grand Prix. They have a drinks bag and they're able to take a little bit of fluid back on board, but clearly we don't store that amount in the car. So they're net down, and it's incredibly difficult. The more laps they do, the more physically exhausted they are, and you would have seen that after the race. Thank you very much for all of your questions, and we look forward to answering them again after the Belgian Grand Prix.